"Can I clean your barn for a plate of food?" That's how it started. A question blown in on the dead cold wind of the Texas Panhandle, winter of 1879. A wind that sounded like it was dragging the bones of the dead across the prairie. I don't think I'll ever forget that day. Because some things, you just know right then and there, are going to split your life into the before and the after. Bo Ramsey, standing in the doorway of his barn with only one hand left to his name and barely that much hope, sees her. This woman, kneeling in the red dirt like she'd forgotten what pride was. Clinging to a child who wasn't even awake enough to cry, her coat not much more than a shadow, her hair a mess the wind couldn't make sense of. She looked up, and I swear you could see the fight in her eyes, even if her voice was nothing but dust. "Please, I can clean your barn, sir, anything. Just a plate of food for her." Bo froze. And not because of the cold. You gotta understand, the land was starving, the people were starving, and Bo had fed wolves before, folks who'd steal the nails out of your boots if you let him. But something about her, or maybe that scarf at her neck, faded, yellow, hand-stitched agave blossoms, made him ask, "Where'd you get that scarf?" Her answer, barely more than a whisper. "It belonged to my husband, Luis Ortega." That name knocked the air right out of him. Bo stepped back, feeling the ghost of a missing arm ache in a place he'd never get back. Remembering mud and grape shot, Luis's hands tying that same scarf around a wound he thought would kill him, whispering, "You're not dying here, amigo. Not next to me." And Bo had never been able to pay that debt, never cleared Luis's name before they hung him as a traitor. And now here was his widow, starving, asking for mercy he never expected to give. He tried to sound gruff, but his voice broke anyway. "Come inside," he said, and when she hesitated, thinking he meant pity, he barked it louder, "Before you freeze." She got up slow, carrying her girl like she'd been doing it for 100 years, and followed him into a house that smelled of pine smoke, regret, and old loneliness. He set out the last of his biscuit, poured warm water, didn't say a word. She just whispered, "Thank you." And that was enough for the night. Morning was colder than a banker's heart. Bo moved around with the silent patience of a man who'd done every job alone for too long, opening gates with his elbow, pulling kettles with a hook strapped to his hand, making do, never asking for help. Mira, that was her name. She watched him, offered to help in the barn, mended blankets, did what she could. Lucia, her daughter, hardly ever woke, skin too hot, breath too shallow. Mira used the last of his lard without asking, and Bo just nodded. You know what I mean? There are times when the words you don't say are heavier than the ones you do. One afternoon, snow coming down mean and sideways, Bo tried to get a fire started out by the hearth, but with one hand, the flint kept slipping, the wind kept stealing his sparks. Mira stepped up, gentle but stubborn. "Let me help." He stiffened, pried a stone in his throat, and said, "I can do it." She didn't back down. "You have only one hand," she said, but there wasn't any pity in it. Just plain truth. People see what you've got left. They don't see what's gone. For the first time, he looked at her. Really looked. Something broke loose. Not anger, not shame. Just the relief of being seen. She struck the flint. The fire lit up, and in that glow, they started to talk for real. He told her how Luis had saved him. Wrapped that scarf around his arm in the mud. How he'd been too late to save Luis from the noose. Mira's eyes were all storm and sorrow, but she didn't look away. She told him what really happened. How her husband helped desperate families across the river. How they called him a smuggler for showing mercy. How the sheriff signed the order for his death. The room got heavy with old grief. Bo fetched a box from the cupboard, unlocked it with shaking hands, and pulled out a letter. "He wrote this from jail," he said, handing it to her. Luis's handwriting curling across the page like a lifeline thrown to the past. She read it in silence, lips moving, the weight of everything they'd lost thick in the air. That night, while Mira and Lucia slept, Bo fixed the roof for the first time in years. He mended a child's coat, his stitches rough but whole, and left it by their bed. Morning came slow, light dragging across the plains, and Mira found the coat, tracing the crooked seams, finding Luis's initials in the lining. She said nothing, but when she held it to her chest, the silence was louder than any thank you. Life fell into a new rhythm, meals of beans and cornbread, slow mornings. The three of them learning to share space that had once been nothing but emptiness. Lucia sat on Bo's lap, learning to write her name with a chunk of charcoal, Mira watching from the doorway. Her heart doing something she hadn't let it do in years. That's how you know a place is healing, right? When the future starts to feel possible again. But the past doesn't stay buried on the plains. One day in Mason Hollow, Mira ran into Eldon Cray, the man who'd signed Luis's death. His eyes were just as mean, his words just as sharp. "Didn't think you made it out," he sneered. Noticing her scarf. "Your man had one just like it." Mira didn't flinch. "You ordered his death," she said. Cray grinned. "Law was clear. You remember that, sugar?" She just picked up her sack of cornmeal and walked out. That night, the smell of smoke woke Bo before the fire reached the porch. He shouted, "Get up! Get the girl!" And Mira was already running, Lucia in her arms, as Bo tried to fight the flames one-handed. The fire was too much, so he led them to an old barn, hiding them in a trapdoor he'd once used for whiskey. As the fire burned their home, Mira whispered, "I should go. I can't let you burn for me." Bo turned, firelight in his eyes. "You think running will stop them? Cray's not after you. He wants silence. And you carry the truth." Mira said, "Why?" And Bo, looking at her like he was finally seeing the reason he survived the war, said, "Because you knelt at my gate for a plate of food. Tonight I kneel for the love you brought into this house, the kind you gave back without asking." Then, with only one hand left, but a promise bigger than any two men could make, he swore to build her a fortress, right there in the dirt and darkness. The next day they rode to the courthouse, just a barn with a flag, for the trial. Mira took the stand, voice shaking at first, then growing strong, telling the whole room about Luis. About the justice stolen from him, about Cray's cruelty. When her voice faltered, Bo stood up, took her hand, pressed it to his chest, and said, "Let me keep it for you." The letter Luis wrote was handed to the judge. The verdict came down like thunder: guilty, guilty, guilty. Cray was sentenced to hang. Some cheered, some wept, but most just nodded. Because sometimes justice is nothing but a pause in a long story. But justice never means closure, not out here. Before the hanging, Cray asked to see Mira. "You think that rope's justice?" He hissed. "You should have died with him." Mira didn't blink. She just walked away, because there are some people who don't get your fear, even at the end. That night, as Cray's life ended and the wind howled over Mason Hollow, Bo and Mira watched the sky, knowing that scars don't fade. They just become part of your story. Over time, from the ashes of everything lost, they built a small inn on that scorched land. Travelers came, cowboys and broken souls, and always found a meal and a story. Mira stitched agave blossoms into scarves. Lucia learned to tie knots with her teeth. Bo grew strong with just one hand and a whole heart. Each night, as dusk settled and coyotes sang, Mira would sit by the fire and tell the truth, not fairy tales, but the kind of stories that heal by naming the pain. And you know, people still argue in Mason Hollow about whether justice really came that day, or if the only justice was the life Mira and Bo made after the fire. But that's how it goes out here. Where love is braver than the law and family is what you make, not what you're born with. So if this story struck a chord, if you felt the wind or heard the promise in Bo's one remaining hand, you're part of it now. Tell me below, do you believe justice was truly done, or is it something we're all still chasing, out here under this wide, unfinished sky?